I've not been here for a while. It's lovely to be back amongst my family, back at home. I've had a bit of a trek. I went over to Houston for a couple of weeks on business, and I got back and went immediately down to Devon to see my parents. And Carol, we realised when we were down there, we hadn't been there for over a year. We've seen them in that time, but we'd not been down to see my parents for over a year. Time just whizzes by. So, Carol, no problem at all, and not popping through every now and again. I know exactly what that's like. And then we got back from that and then went off to Norfolk with our 3 children and all of their respective others and our grandchildren. So we've been away, so apologies for that, but it's really good to be back with you all here at home. So a boy asks his father at the dinner table, "Dad, are bugs good to eat?" The dad replies, "Dad, that is disgusting. We don't talk about those things at the dinner table." After dinner, the dad goes up to his son and said, "Son, what did you want to talk about?" "Oh, nothing, Dad. It's too late. I wanted to say there was a bug in your soup, but you ate it." Let me start with a very familiar reading. One I think we've probably heard a few times before. It's in Matthew chapter 18, verses 12 to 14. Chapter 18, verses 12 to 14. "What do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go to look for the one that wandered off? And if he finds it, I tell you the truth, he is happier about that one sheep than about the 99 that did not wander off. In the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should be lost." This is a very, very well-known parable, well-known Bible story. We've probably heard it, probably read it, 100, 1,000, 10,000 times, I don't know, in my lifetime. I'm sure I've read it to our children time and time again. But I pray this morning that God will reveal something new in those words that he shared, that Jesus said all those years ago. The parable is really, really simple. And yet as I reread it, there were some really important truths in there. It's clearly a description of God's love for his people. We've been talking and praying about that this morning. But to me, it also showed God's infinite patience with us. As a parent, you have a role to be patient with your children. And somehow they have an innate ability to test that patience completely. Somehow they learn it at a very early age. Our Olivia, when she was younger, she didn't really need much sleep, or very little sleep at all. And so we'd put her to bed and she would just be playing or getting up or getting into mischief, often just playing or reading books, but not going to sleep as we wanted her to. After many weeks or months, Jill went to sleep clinic to find out what we should do to encourage Olivia to go to sleep at the right time. And they told us what we needed to do was sit in her bedroom, ask her to go to bed, and then every time she got up or did something, just say, "No, Olivia, back to sleep." No eye contact, no noise, just sat there. So the first night, I sat there for, an hour, 2 hours doing this repeatedly. Jill perhaps did the next night. And so it went on. And after a few days, we were able to sit a bit further away from the bed. And then a few more days went by, and then we could sit by the door. And then we could sit the other side of the door. And then another few days, and we sat outside the door. And eventually, it worked. But it took a long time. And I remember those days, it took incredible patience to sit there, not to get annoyed, not to get agitated, but just very calmly say, "Olivia, back to sleep, go back to bed." And of course, that persists through their life. And as we were on holiday earlier, we're looking at the grandchildren. Even at their age, not even a year yet, you could see them learning those things to test the patience of our daughter. The good news, the amazing news is God is ultimately patient. He's ultimately patient. He's patient with us day in, day out. And that started right at the start of time and will go on to the end of time. It started the moment I was conceived and went through to the day that I die. God is incredibly patient with us. If we read in Exodus very early on, God's people, Israel, had escaped from the Egyptians, and already in chapter 14 they were complaining, they were grumbling. Verse 12, didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Already they were complaining, already they were grumbling. But Moses responds, this is the bit I wanted to highlight. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. The Lord will fight for you. You need only be still. And of course, through our lives, we're being transformed, hopefully, day by day into his likeness. And so towards the end, in the New Testament, if we look at Galatians, we read in a letter there at the end, it says, and this is Paul writing, in Galatians 6:9, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. So God is infinitely patient, but are we patient? Do we never give up? Do we keep fighting? What a challenge that is for me. I don't know how many of you have been watching Clarkson's Farm. Yes. John has. A few of you have. Yes. Very funny. I've enjoyed it anyway. It's a series following Jeremy Clarkson trying to be a farmer. You can sort of imagine what happens if you know Jeremy Clarkson. He's not overly proficient at most of the farming duties required. It's quite fun. You learn a little bit about farming too. There's some serious stuff in there as well. But the point I'm trying to get across here is not that he bought this ridiculously massive tractor that he didn't need, the Lamborghini tractor, no. But it was the episode on sheep. If you've not seen it, I'm sure a lot of you know that actually sheep are quite hard to look after. They're not easy. They're quite hard to be a shepherd to. As I was preparing this talk, I sort of chuckled to myself. I thought, yeah, that's fun, isn't it? That Jesus in this parable chose to use sheep as the animal to represent us. Now, it may just be that was a common animal at that time that was being used to farm. Maybe just randomly picked it, but perhaps not. Perhaps he picked sheep for a reason. Now, I'm not a farmer, nor is Jeremy Clarkson, but I've read a bit about farming. And when Olivia was younger, she was pondering what career choices to make, and she was thinking about potentially becoming a vet or a veterinary nurse. And so part of that she thought, and she read up and learned that she needed to get some experience with animals, different animals, not just a dog. You needed farm animals and different things. So she applied to a farm in Petersfield to look after the cows. Being a dad, of course, I was very supportive of this, not really realising what a milking herd of cows really required you to do, what time you had to be up in the morning, or what time I had to be up to take her to the thing over the Christmas holidays. So I was up very early every morning, driving her over to the thing. But what I learnt through that was about cows and a little bit about the herd they had there, and how they sort of knew what to do. They just sort of came in, and the first cow every morning was the same. Every morning it would be the same cow that trotted in first, and the last cow was always the same as well. It was the last cow. Just interesting, just how these animals just sort of knew what to do. They seemed a lot easier than sheep to me. You probably know, but sheep are and have to be sheared regularly. If they didn't, they would die. They have to have their wool cut off them. If they don't, they end up in all sorts of difficulties. And it's actually, if you didn't do it in this country, that would be a crime. It would be not looking after the sheep properly, because they need that. They are completely dependent on humans to look after them. Sheep also, as I said, seem to have this ability to get into difficulty. Again, on Clarkson's farm, you'll see them getting up to all sorts of mischief. In fact, when Harrison was a child growing up in infant school, he had a friend who lived on a farm, Jack, farming in Clanfield, and he occasionally would go over and do fun things, ride on a tractor, go in the combine harvester, or just play with Jack on the farm, and they'd get up to fun in the fields. But I remember on a number of occasions he'd come back and say they found a sheep stuck on the barbed wire or in difficulty in some way or other. The sheep seem to have this inane habit of just getting into difficulty. And I guess unlike cows and other animals, they also seem to me a little bit difficult to train. Almost untrainable, to be honest. You don't see sheep doing what they're meant to be doing. In fact, that's why we have a shepherd, and in this country often sheepdogs, to round them up, to keep them together, to get them where they need to go. Does that sound familiar to us? If I was looking for a breed, a type of animal, a disruptive, untrainable, completely reliant animal, might be the one I would choose to represent myself or humans as a parable if I was going to give that. Of course, sheep are used throughout the Bible. If we go to Isaiah again, right at the start, also in the middle here, chapter 53, verse 6. This is a prophecy of what was going to happen to Jesus over the Easter period, like we've just remembered last week. Verse 5, but he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him. By his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. And again, if we read in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 25. For you were like sheep gone astray, but now you have returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls. So, of course, there's many more verses about sheep and lambs and different passages I could have chosen, but not many about cows, chickens, or even alpacas. The second point, God does not forget. It really stood out when I read the passage. God didn't forget about the lost sheep. He didn't overlook it. That one was missing, and he remembered. And of course, throughout the Bible, we intrinsically know it. God never forgets us. Right from the start in Genesis, when Noah was out, built the ark, put all the animals on, the world flooded, God didn't forget about him, think, oh, I'll go off and do something and I'll come back to that later. No. In chapter 8, verse 1, we remember God remembered Noah. Didn't leave him. God remembered. And again in Isaiah, we learn about Israel, talking about the nation. Can a mother never forget that baby at her breast and have no compassion on that child she has borne? Though she may forget, I will not forget you. See, I have you on the palms of my hands. Your walls are ever before me. God will never forget anyone, any of us or anybody. But do we forget? Do we become forgetful from time to time? God calls us all to be shepherds. shepherds of his people. In John, Peter is asked the question 3 times, do you love me? And each time Jesus replies, and this is after Jesus has come back after Easter. And Jesus responds, shepherd my sheep. Do we forget? I worked while I was at university for the Portsmouth Evening News. A very unlikely job for me, not very good at English, but I was asked, we had a friend, and I was looking for a part-time job, and I got offered an interview there designing adverts. Sounds very grand. It wasn't really designing adverts. It was more laying out words on a page that was the right format and the right words in the right sort of style to be put into a newspaper. But I did that for, probably 2-3 years while I was at university. And it was a night shift we worked. I turned up about 4:30 in the afternoon and went home between 2:30 and 4:30 in the morning. And during that time made lots of great friends, and it was quite a close-knit team in the office area. There was only a fairly small number of people during the night. And there was a guy who turned up, and he didn't really integrate with the team. He was a bit on the side, he was a bit quiet, a bit sort of touchy, a bit sort of prickly. People sort of didn't quite know how to sort of bring him in, and he sort of kept himself to himself. And then one day he didn't turn up for work, and no one really knew what happened. And we assumed he'd just been fired, because that happened relatively often at the news. It wasn't a very friendly place to work. They fired people fairly quickly and easily. But after a few weeks, it became apparent he had actually got into an argument with his partner and stabbed them, and subsequently went to prison for that. And I didn't think much more of it, but I remember going back there after I'd left and speaking to people, and it came out that one of the people who worked there, was going to visit this person in prison. Wow. Now, this person didn't know him any better than I. He was equally prickly and not necessarily best friends or anything. And I'd probably not given him a second thought after I'd left the news. Not even thought about it, really. But this person who was a Christian had taken it upon himself, not just to pop along once, but to regularly go and visit this person in prison. Do we forget? The third point, then. I don't know why talks are made up of 3 points. I was puzzling this when I was writing this down before. I'm thinking, why do we do... So I Googled it, expecting Google, as always, to know exactly the right answer, because it does, doesn't it? I mean, it always comes up with exactly the right answer. And this was what it came back with. It said 4 points are too long, 2 points don't satisfy. I don't know if that's true. It wasn't quite as inspirational as I was hoping for, nevertheless. Yeah. That's it, yeah. That was it. Dear. Right, I've lost my notes now. This is a problem. Yeah. There we go. So when we read the parable, the other thing that struck me was that the shepherd left the 99. He just went off to find the one that had been lost. Now, I think in our lives, and as we look around sheep farming in the UK, we probably don't think too much about that. I mean, there isn't a shepherd out in the fields with the sheep day in, day out. They seem to roam around in their little electric fence or their walled field quite happily. And so perhaps it hasn't quite got the same meaning to us. But I think, and I understand in Bible times, there weren't quite the same sort of walled structures of nice green fields that we have in the UK, and that the shepherds lived with the sheep to protect them and to make sure they didn't get up to mischief, keep an eye on them, and to protect them from things attacking them. I guess we learn about that from David and Goliath. David had a sling and obviously protected the sheep as a shepherd. While I was over in America, I went to a sort of cowboy town, I guess you'd call it. It had all the old streets, and they drove cattle through. And there was a series called 1923, a new series that had been filmed there. And so on the plane on the way back, before I went and tried to get some sleep, I watched the first episode, and again, that was very similar, that there was some cowboys looking after cows and there was some shepherds looking after sheep, and again, they were driving them up into the mountains and staying and having to stay with them, because otherwise they would have just wandered off into goodness knows where, or been attacked by the wild animals that lived at that time. So for us, when we think about this, perhaps God doesn't have to worry about the 99. Perhaps he's saying to us, it's not a problem. We're okay. He can leave the 99 to go after the one, because he knows that we will be okay. We're saved. We're all right. Let me read some words from a song called Reckless Love. I think probably a lot of you know it, but I'll read it. Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me. You have been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You have been so, so kind to me. When I was your foe, still your love fought for me. You have been so, so good to me. When I felt no worth, you paid it all for me. You have been so, so kind to me. There's no shadow you won't light up. Mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. There's no wall you won't kick down. Lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. So as we wrap up, let me just reflect back on those 3 points. Firstly, we need to be patient. Our timing is different to God's timing. He can see the big picture. We can't. So let's be patient and keep praying for those people on our hearts. Those family members we prayed about earlier. Let's not give up, but let's not worry about them either. God knows. Secondly, let's not forget. Being patient does not mean forgetting. Like in today's passage, the shepherd did not forget the lost sheep. He didn't just pray for the lost sheep and concentrate on the 99. He focused his entire attention on the one. Who is God calling us to pursue today? And finally, as we are one of the 99, we are in a safe position. We might not feel it, we might not recognize that, but God has us covered. And God wants us to be confident in that. Why? So we can reflect that confidence in those around us, to the one that He's asking us to reach out to. Let's finish with a prayer. God, thank you for the simplicity of the parable of the lost sheep. Help us to be confident and patient in what you are doing in our lives, and to be tuned in to hear who you are calling us to go after. Amen.